Good evening. Pastor Joe asked me to do this. It was right around about the first week or so of October, and I told him sure I'd be glad to. And he said, well, I'd like for you to tell about when you got saved, a little bit about your teenage years, a little bit of experience in Vietnam, and about how you love for missions. And I told him I would. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rockers. And so ever since he's asked me this, and I wake up early in the mornings. I mean, you know, when we talk about 3:30 or so every morning, and when I worked, that's when I would solve my problems. As I would wake up and I would lay there and I'd figure out what I had to do to make things right, or what I needed to do to be able to make the decks go together, or porches, or whatever, like they were supposed to. Well, since I've quit work, when I wake up in the morning, I would lay there and have these thoughts about Vietnam or Southeast Asia. Well, after he asked me this, I didn't have time to think about that. I had to think about what I was going to say tonight. And I've sat down and I've wrote, and I got 6 pages here that I wrote out, and I told Sherry, I said, I don't have time for all that, because he said you got 5 minutes or 30 minutes, or how long you want. And I promised Miss Susan McKay that I would not be any longer than necessary. But in August of 1962 was when I got saved. It was a fall revival at Oak Grove Baptist Church. I can't tell you who the guest speaker was. John Duffy was the pastor there, and I knew in my heart that I needed to go down and accept Jesus, tell him that Jesus was in my heart, and I wanted to spend the rest of my life for him, and I did, and I followed it, baptism. Of course, at that time, it was getting cool. Oak Grove at that time didn't have a baptistry, so we went to Union Hill Baptist Church, where I got baptized. And I lived a normal life, I guess, as a teenager. I knew I was God's, but that's all I knew, you know. We had a super Christian mom, just a super mom. Our dad, it was May 1986 when he got saved. So, and he loved to partake of the Bible. So he never went to church with us, or never had any spiritual words for us, even though he was a great dad. But there was a lot of spiritual men in my life, and there were some other good men in my life. And I'm not going to name all of them off, but I'm going to name 2. One of them was Candace's granddaddy, Mr. Horace O'Reilly. The other one was Carl Stennett, Miss Carla Joe Rollins' daddy. They meant great things to me. They still mean great things to me. So, but as we move on, I had a school teacher by the name of Bill Crump. I spent a lot of time with him. I worked with him, and we cut mining props, fence posts, saw logs, whatever the tract of timber he bought would make. And he goes to Hueytown Methodist Church. He's always been a lot of. He kept me straight. He kept me straight in school. He kept me straight out of school. Well, when I turned 16 in November 1966, in the spring of 1967, Oak Grove had a bus driver that one afternoon couldn't drive his bus. So Mr. Crump, he comes to me and he says, "You're going to drive that bus this afternoon." He said, "You drive them log trucks. I know you can drive that bus." At the age of 16, I became the substitute bus driver for Oak Grove High School. In 67, when we started back to school, I had a bus route. I drove the Short Creek Birmingham run. 67, 68, I drove a bus. 68, 69, I drove a bus. That's my junior year and my senior year, I never missed a day because I drove the bus. Might not have stayed there once I got there, but God's blessed me in a lot of ways, you know, and right around the 1st of February, I'm not real good with dates, but right around the 1st of February, 1968, I had this beautiful little blonde walk up to me in the hall at school and said, "Hey, Searles Community Center is holding a Valentine banquet, February the 14th. Would you like to go with me?" That was the beginning of my life-changing experience right there. I mean, we went. The second date we went on, I told her, I said, "Someday I'm going to marry you." Well, May the 29th, 1970, we got married. If we make it to May the 29th of 2019, it'll be 49 years, if we make it to May. But we got married, and I worked at U.S. Steel. As soon as I got out of high school, I went to work at U.S. Steel, had a good job, made good money. When she got out of school, she went to work at Liberty National Life Insurance in Birmingham, had a good job. We was on top of the world. We was going to church. We went to church at Prudes Creek Baptist Church every Sunday. On Friday the 13th, 1970, November, Friday the 13th, 1970, when I got home from work and got the mail, that was my draft notice. It said, "Report to the draft board in Bessemer, Alabama on December the 1st at 6 o'clock. Well, she dropped me off, and then she went on to work that day, and I thought, well, I'll be back home by dark, shortly after dark. I didn't come back home. I went straight to Fort Pope, Louisiana. I'd been drafted into the Army, but thank God, as they lined us up down the wall, and they come down through here, and every fifth one they pulled out and said Marines. 1, 2, 3, 4 Marines. Let me tell you, I got to count before they got to me, because I didn't want to be in the Army. I sure didn't want to be in the Marines. But I went to Fort Pope. I got to come home 2 weeks for Christmas. So that was the next time I seen her after she dropped me off at the draft board was just before Christmas, and then right after the first of the year I had to go back. Well, the next time I seen her was when I graduated basic training. Her brother and his wife brought her and another one that was her brother's wife's sister's husband had got drafted the same time I did. We were in the same unit. So they brought them down for the graduation, and we spent the weekend together at New Orleans. And then when we got back after that weekend, I got on a plane. I was here. I'm blessed again. I was always pretty good with my hands, always working on stuff. So I passed enough tests that when they give us all these little tests, that I had a 67 in 20 MOS. Well, all these boys going to infantry over here, they knew where they was going. I knew where they was going, but I didn't know where I was going because I didn't know what a 67 in 20 was. Well, it's a crew chief / mechanic on a UH-1H, which is a Huey helicopter. So I go to Fort Eustis, Virginia. That's where, instead of sending me to Fort Rucker, Alabama, they sent me to Fort Eustis, Virginia. So right after I get up there, I find out that I can live off base. So I came home, I flew home, and Sherry and I moved back up there together. So we got to stay together while I was taking my AIT training at Fort Eustis. Well, when we got through with the AIT, my orders were going to Nam. And I knew that because everybody there was going to Vietnam. So she and I came home. I took a 30-day leave. When it come time to go to the airport, I wanted her to carry me. I didn't want anybody else to go. This was the era when men didn't say tell their sons that they loved them. That's the only time I remember before I left, my daddy ever told me he loved me. Well, I flew from Birmingham to Seattle. And it was like a herd of cattle out there as she showed up. They give you a number. Well, my number come up. They put me on a plane, and I flew from Hawaii. I flew to Hawaii, to Guam, to the Philippines, to Cameron Bay. When Cameron Bay, there was so many of us coming in so fast they didn't have nowhere to put us. They was trying to cut orders and get you out of there just as fast as they could. We slept in the sand that night. And then that was the longest night. I think one of the longest nights I ever stayed awake. But from there, they sent me to Camp Eagle, which was up north. It was just south of Cameron Bay. Quantree. I was flew to Field Transportation, 101st Airborne Air Mobile Unit. Well, when I got there, they told me, my first sergeant said, we got your papers, you're a pretty good mechanic, said we're just going to keep you in the hangars working on helicopters. That's great. Well, when we went to fly, that's great. That didn't even last 30 days. I was loaned out to different companies to fly. We flew to Da Nang one night, and we couldn't get back. It was too late. They said, we're going to spend the night down here. So when we flew in, one of the fellows that was stationed there said, hey, so they got a ham radio operator right down here. If you'll go and give them your home number, they'll make a call for you and come get you when the call goes through. Well, I told them where my chopper was tied up, and I said, I'll be in it. Well, sure enough, about 3 o'clock that morning, they come got me. I got to talk to her. That's the only time I talked to her till I got back. If I could have walked on water that night, I would have left, headed home, because when I left here, the part I left out was my wife was 5 months pregnant when I left here. When we left, we promised one another that we would write each other every day. And I wrote some stupid letters, I promise you. But we wrote every day. Well, my wife has still got all 365 of those stupid letters. I couldn't keep mine. I just didn't have nowhere to keep stuff. And when the monsoon season came, it was constantly raining, and so I never knew where I was going to be, or who I was going to be flying with, or what I was going to be doing. But I was always praying. I always felt God's presence. And that was one of the first things I'd ask her when I got over there, was to please send me a Bible. I didn't even carry a Bible with me. And that's another thing for you young guys today that are in service. I never seen a chaplain, never seen anywhere to hold church. We were, if you didn't know God, you wasn't going to know God over there unless somebody shared with you. But after my daughter was born, I was still writing letters home about how she was doing, how you feel. Because it was 9 days before the Red Cross could find me to tell me that my daughter was here. She was 8 months old before I ever got to see her. But once I got some pictures, it was all about getting home then. So, but after I'd been over there 5 months, everything's 5 months, After I'd been over there 5 months, if I'd have been there 6, I could have come home with the 101st, because they stood down and come home. Well, I'd only been there 5 months, so they sent me down south to Benoit. And I was assigned to the 1st Cav 215th Medevac unit. Well, when I go in, and I take my duffel bag and I go in, and here's this old first sergeant sitting behind the desk, and he said, I want to introduce you to your 2 pilots. It was two black gentlemen standing over here. One of them was Captain Herndon, the other one was W.O.1 Rogers. He said, you'll be flying with them every day. He said, that's your chopper, but they'll be the pilots on it. And then he introduced me to the medic. A medic had short time. I don't even remember his name. And that's only two pilots I remember. Everybody I flew with, that's only two pilots I remember because I spent so much time with them. But when he introduced me and they went out, he said, now, I need to know something. I said, and you don't say sir to a sergeant. But I said, yes, sir, due to his age. And he told me, you don't say sir to me. I said, okay. He said, I need to know, are you a sod or a head? How many in here knows what a sod is? How many in here knows what a head is? This is a young redneck from Alabama. I didn't have a clue what a sod or head was. He said, I need to know if you're a sod or a head. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, a sod is an alcoholic, drinks. I said, no, sir, not me. My daddy drank enough. Me and him, I don't have to. He said, I said, what's a head? He said, that's one that smokes marijuana and does drugs. I said, no, sir, I got a wife and a daughter back home. I've never done that, and I'm not going to do that. He looked at me, and he said, what am I going to do with you? He said, because everybody here does one or the other. And I said, well, no, sir, not me. He said, well, I'm going to put you with the sots. He said, they all drink and get loud, but he said, at least you won't smell the smoke and won't mess your head up. I spent most of my time sleeping in my chopper. The whole time I was with the 101st, the 1st Cal 215 Medevac unit, we never turned down a mission. We flew in. It didn't matter how hot the LZ was, we went in. I had two super pilots. When the short-termer went home, I got a big old Pollock boy by the name of Rosinski. He was my medic. I haven't talked to any of them since I left. But God blessed me with this crew. Captain Herndon was a good Christian. Mr. Rogers, W.O.1 Rogers, he was a Christian man. And Rosinski was a Christian. So I was blessed. We would fly into hot LC praying. Was going down Highway 5, flying into Anlock one day, and Captain Herndon said, if anybody's got a problem with doing this, you need to speak up now, because we may not come out of here. Nobody said anything. I felt God's presence all over me. Sure enough, we went in, we picked up what we were supposed to pick up, which was supposed to have been a wounded GI, but he was already dead time we got there. And so we got him, we came out. I could just feel God. That's the first time I knew that what I was going to do when I got back home, I was going to help other people know God. And I didn't tell you, the motto of the 215th Medevac unit was so that others may live. And I still try to live with that today, so others may live. Even though we're going to die and we're going to leave this earth here, we're going to live in heaven. But when I came back in and we got to looking at the bullet holes in our chopper, I knew God was all over us, because our chopper was full of holes and none of us was hit. In July, one of the big dogs somewhere decided that we was going to go from a medevac unit to a dust-off unit. They took the guns off of the choppers, painted them white with a red cross on them, and they said, if you don't want to fly, all you got to do is refuse. I said, I don't want to fly on a white elephant that's going to get shot down and you don't have no way to help yourself. So that day, I was transferred over to the 228th 1st Cal Assault Helicopter Company. That's where I spent the rest of my time until I come home. When I came home, I walked the aisle at Big Creek Baptist Church. Brother Richard Bolin was the pastor there. I made things right. His words were, I know you're not going to live down here, so wherever you go, you get yourself in a church where that you can go every service and be faithful and active for God. I'll never forget that. We bought a house in Glen Oaks, and sure enough, we got involved in Wilkes Baptist Church. Spent 14 years up there. Every Sunday I wasn't at work, I was at church. Every Wednesday night I wasn't at work, I was at church. We had a visitation program every Tuesday night. If I wasn't at work, I was visiting. 1974, Wilkes Baptist Church ordained me as a deacon. We spent 14 years serving in Wilkes. We moved to Rock Mountain Lakes. Moved in August. I was working every Sunday at day shift. I'd drive home. I'd go by that little church going home. I'd turn around and drive by that church Sunday night going back to Wilkes. After about 2 months, I told Sherry, I said, we're going to visit Rock Mountain Lakes Baptist Church. I don't want to keep driving back and forth by it every Sunday. We did. About 3 Sundays later, we became members of Rock Mountain Lakes Baptist Church. We served in it 18 years. I went on 2 mission trips with the church in the latter part of the years. In 2001, just before I retired, I went to Venezuela on a mission trip with the Bessemer Baptist Association. Right after I retired, in the first part of 2000, I guess about January 2002, I went back to Venezuela. I'd been invited over to teach 14 young men the basics of electricity. I went over and I told Sherry when I come home, I said, if you'll go with me, we'll move to Venezuela and be missionaries the rest of our life. I said, we'll come home on vacation. She said, you can go if you want to. But that's not my calling, and I'm not going. So I said, if you can't go, I can't go because we're married and all. I'm not going to leave you. We had a lot of troubles in our life, but God's always seen them through. When I first came home, they just brought us home and dumped us out. We didn't know anything about the VA. They didn't tell us anything about the kind of help we could get. We didn't know anything about PTSD. If it ever got a hold of me, they'd have probably locked me up. And the only time she's ever offered to leave me was right after I come home. And she said, I'm going to pack my bags and we're going to leave. And I said, you pack yours, pack mine, I'm going with you. I said, it's going to get better. I said, God's going to get us through this. Sure enough, he did. March 8, 1974, he gave us a little boy. Brent's 43 now. He's active in Ezra Baptist Church, a deacon in Ezra Baptist Church. Christy's sitting right back here. Both my kids are in church, active. In 2004, I got to having some problems I really didn't know I had. Dr. John Isis down here at Bessemer in Caraway took 12 inches of my colon out. Had a polyp bigger than a softball. And he told me, he said, listen, he said, we've checked it every way we can check it. He said, the only thing I can tell you is that God's not through with you yet because it should have been cancerous. He said, there's no cancerous cells in it. He said, I don't know what you got going on with God, but he said, he's not through with you yet. In 2002, I'd got involved with disaster relief. 2003, I went and took chainsaw training. I'd been on several trips with them. I loved it. 2005, I told Sherry in August, in July, I said, we're going to resign our positions at Rock Mountain Lakes Baptist Church, and we're going to go to a church in Birmingham Association somewhere. I said, because that's who I traveled with. At that time, nobody in Bessemer was involved. So we started visiting around different churches. About that time, August 29th, Katrina hit. I got a call and asked would I take a group of men from the Bessemer Baptist Association to Biloxi, Mississippi on a chainsaw unit. And I said, sure, I'd be proud to. But I said, Bessemer don't have any men. He said, sure they do. The Tuesday night prior to, he said, North Highlands Baptist Church had a bus pull up and said there was 59 got off of it wanting to get trained. That's when I knew Frank Nelson. But I didn't know him. I didn't know him, but I did know him. I knew who he was, knew who his daddy was, knew who Ronnie was. But that's the first time I'd been off with Frank Nelson. John Oldham was River Road Baptist Church. He was with us. There was 9 of us went. One from River Road, myself from didn't have a church, and 7 from here. So we discussed this while we was on the way down there. And old Larry Harris, I love Larry to death. Larry said, you need to come visit us. There's going to be some way that you'll be treated so many ways that you're going to like one of them. So when we came home, I told Sherry, I said, listen, I'd love to go to North Highlands Baptist Church and visit one time. We came through the back doors back there, and I felt like this was home. I could feel God's presence. Brother Doug, he told me, he said, there's so much going on here that you can't be involved in everything. He's right. But I could be involved in what I wanted to be involved in. I could be involved in missions. I love missions. God has used this church, and God has used me in so many ways, helping different people, that it is unreal. And the whole time I was involved in this, and I failed to tell you, in October 1987, when we moved to Rock Mountain Lakes, I got involved with the Rock Mountain Fire Department. Later on, it became a district and became a call of fire department. I started at the bottom. I worked my way to chief. I worked my way back down to the bottom again because the chief wasn't for me. But October 2005, on invitation, I became a disaster relief chaplain. 2014, I became a fire department chaplain. Went to Shelton State Fire College and got certified as a state fire department chaplain. And trying to help people, it's like trying to witness to people. I told Miss Sylvia, I said, you save is like witnessing people. Some people are able to save, some people you aren't. They just don't want to accept God. Some people aren't. It isn't time for them to go yet, and God's not going to let them go. God uses me as a vessel in a lot of ways, a lot of times. Sometimes we need to just stop and think. About who we are and what God has in store for us. I'm going to read Romans 12, verse 3 through 8. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought to, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of faith of God has given you, just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function. So in Christ, we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the other. We have different gifts according to the grace given us by a man's gift is prophesying. Let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. And then in James 1:17, it says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly light, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the words of truth, that we might be a kind and first fruit of all he created. Every one of us has a gift of some kind. Mine's working, serving, helping other people. I love doing this. I hope to do this till God carries me home. But I'm beginning to have a little trouble, as we all do when we get older, due to Agent Orange. And they said, I found out a few years ago that's what the polyp was probably caused from, was from Agent Orange. I have asthmatic heart disease. I'm 50% of the right side of my heart don't work like it's supposed to. I have chest pains, anxiety, a lot of it's because Dr. Walensky at Princeton says the small blood vessels are dying on the ends. So what do? I just take a handful of pills every day, go on, and if it gets to hurting too bad, I'll sit down. But I want to be God's vessel, God's servant, as long as I'm able. I've told Sherry's heard me say this many times. If I die on a mission trip, I died happy. I died doing what God wanted me to do.